Sutton Hoo, near Woodbridge, East Anglia, is the site of two 6th and early 7th century cemeteries. One contained an undisturbed ship burial, including a wealth of Anglo-Saxon artifacts of outstanding art, historical and archaeological significance, most of which are now in the British Museum in London. The site is in the care of the National Trust. Sutton Hoo is of primary importance to early medieval historians because it sheds light on a period of English history that is on the margin between myth, legend, and historical documentation. Use of the site culminated at a time when Radwald, the ruler of the East Angles, held senior power among the English people, and played a dynamic if ambiguous part in the establishment of Christian rulership in England. It is generally thought most likely that he is the person buried in the ship. The site has been vital in understanding the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of East Anglia and the whole early Anglo-Saxon period. The ship burial, probably dating from the early 7th century and excavated in 1939, is one of the most magnificent archaeological finds in England for its size and completeness, far-reaching connections, the quality and beauty of its contents, and the profound interest of the burial ritual itself. The initial excavation was privately sponsored by the landowner. When the significance of the find became apparent, national experts took over. Subsequent archaeological campaigns, particularly in the late 1960s and late 1980s, have explored the wider site and many other individual burials. The most significant artifacts from the ship burial, displayed in the British Museum, are those found in the burial chamber, including a suite of metalwork dress fittings in gold and gems, a ceremonial helmet, shield and sword, a lyre, and many pieces of silver plate from Byzantium. The ship burial has from the time of its discovery prompted comparisons with the world described in the heroic Old English poem Beowulf, which is set in southern Sweden. It is in that region, especially at Vendel, that close archaeological parallels to the ship burial are found, both in its general form and in details of the military equipment contained in the burial. Although it is the ship burial that commands the greatest attention from tourists, two separate cemeteries also have rich historical meaning because of their position in relation to the Deburn estuary and the North Sea, and their relation to other sites in the immediate neighbourhood. Of the two grave fields found at Sutton Hoo, one had long been known to exist because it consists of a group of approximately 20 earthen burial mounds that rise slightly above the horizon of the hill spur when viewed from the opposite bank. The other, called here the New Burial Ground, is situated on a second hill spur close to the present exhibition hall, about 500 meters upstream of the first. It was discovered and partially explored in 2000 during preliminary work for the construction of the hall. This also had burials under mounds, but was not known because these mounds had long since been flattened by agricultural activity. The site has a visitor center, with many original and replica artifacts and a reconstruction of the ship burial chamber, and the burial field can be toured in the summer months and at weekends and school holidays year-round. Location: Sutton Hoo is the name of an area spread along the bank of the River Deburn opposite the harbour of the small Suffolk town of Woodbridge, about 7 miles from the North Sea, overlooking the tidal estuary a little below the lowest convenient fording place. It formed a path of entry into East Anglia during the period that followed the end of Roman imperial rule in the 5th century. South of Woodbridge, there are 6th century burial grounds at Rushmere, Little Beelings, and Tuddenham St Martin and circling Brightwell Heath, the site of mounds that date from the Bronze Age. There are cemeteries of a similar date at Rendlesham and Ufford. A ship burial at Snape is the only one in England that can be compared to the example at Sutton Hoo. The territory between the Orwell and the watersheds of the Aldi and Deben rivers may have been an early centre of royal power, originally centred upon Rendlesham or Sutton Hoo, and a primary component in the formation of the East Anglian Kingdom. In the early 7th century, Gypeswick began its growth as a centre for foreign trade. Botolph's monastery at Icon was founded by royal grant in 654, and Bede identified Rendlesham as the site of Ethelwald's royal dwelling. Early settlement. Neolithic and Bronze Age. There is evidence that Sutton Hoo was occupied during the Neolithic period, circa 3000 BCE. When woodland in the area was cleared by agriculturalists, they dug small pits that contained flint-tempered earthenware pots. Several pits were near to hollows where large trees had been uprooted. The Neolithic farmers may have associated the hollows with the pots. During the Bronze Age, when agricultural communities living in Britain were adopting the newly introduced technology of metalworking, timber-framed roundhouses were built at Sutton Hoo, with wattle and daub walling and thatched roofs. The best surviving example contained a ring of upright posts, up to 30 mm in diameter, with one pair suggesting an entrance to the southeast. In the central hearth, a faience bead had been dropped. The farmers who dwelt in this house used decorated beaker-style pottery, cultivated barley, oats, and wheat, and collected hazelnuts. They dug ditches that marked the surrounding grassland into sections, indicating land ownership. The acidic sandy soil eventually became leached and infertile, and it was likely that for this reason, the settlement was eventually abandoned, to be replaced in the Middle Bronze Age by sheep or cattle, which were enclosed by wooden stakes. Iron Age and Romano-British period. During the Iron Age, iron became the dominant form of metal used in the British Isles, replacing copper and bronze. In the Middle Iron Age, people living in the Sutton Hoo area grew crops again, dividing the land up into small enclosures now known as Celtic fields. The use of narrow trenches implies grape cultivation, whilst in other places, small pockets of dark soil indicate that big cabbages may have been grown. Such cultivation continued into the Romano-British period, from 43 to around 410. Life for the Britons remained unaffected by the arrival of the Romans. Several artifacts from this period, including a few fragments of pottery and a discarded fibula, have been found. As the peoples of Western Europe were encouraged by the empire to maximize the use of land for growing crops, the area around Sutton Hoo suffered degradation and soil loss. It was eventually abandoned again and became overgrown.